The worst is when you think you can't realize your dreams at all, no matter how hard you work. That's just not true. Sometimes you need a little boost to understand what you're capable of, and to help you take responsibility for your aspirations. I hope my story helps you dream big dreams and make those dreams come true. Chapter 1. Born in the Shadow of Mount Rushmore. My papa wasn't much for telling stories. He liked facts and information. If you asked him about the Mexican Revolution or about the freezing point of water, he'd go on all day, sounding grown up and important, like the men who read the news on television. Mommy was the storyteller in our family, as long as the subject was people. I thought she must know everybody in the world, who their family was, where they came from, and what they did all day. Still, my father had one story that I always loved to hear. "Papa, tell me about the hospital," I'd beg him. Sometimes it took a few tries, but he'd finally look up from his book. "The hospital," he'd repeat, his voice thoughtful. "I drove by it every day, but I'd never gone inside. It was not far from Ellsworth Air Force Base, where we lived when I was stationed in South Dakota, less than an hour from Mount Rushmore." He would always start by telling me about his time in the Army. Papa was proud of his Army service, so part of the story was about how he'd entered the Army after the Korean War as a lieutenant in the Air Defense Artillery. "Your brother Mario was already 2 years old," Papa would continue, finally getting to the important part of the story. "Once we knew the baby was about to be born, I brought Mommy to the hospital. We all went inside, even Mario. The nurse told me Mommy would need some time, and I should come back later. So I went home to the base where we lived and left Mario with a neighbor. When I got back to the hospital, they said it would be a while before I could see your mother." In those days, fathers stayed in a waiting room while their babies were being born, and new babies were usually brought to the nursery, not kept with their mothers. It was a long time before a nurse came out to tell Papa that Mommy was fine, but she was asleep. The nurse said Papa could see his baby. When he got to the nursery, Papa looked through a big window and saw rows of metal cribs with clear plastic sides, each crib just big enough for one tiny infant. Some of the babies had blonde hair, and some had brown hair or no hair at all. Nearly all of them had fair skin. Only one baby had very dark hair. "That was me," I'd say. "I wasn't even 1 day old." I knew Papa had had no trouble picking me out in the nursery because I looked like him, even though he was a grown man in an Army uniform, and I was a little baby wrapped in a white blanket. He knew right away I was his, and I was sure that I knew right away that he was my papa. Papa would nod at that point in the story, and sometimes he'd even smile. I'd wait for him to say something else, but usually his nose would go right back into his book. I was always excited to hear this story, but over the years, I came to understand more about what living in South Dakota had been like for Mommy. Papa's family was from Mexico, but he had grown up in Texas. He had gotten all of his schooling, including college, in the United States, and he spoke English well. After graduation, he was fulfilling his Army ROTC commitment as an officer stationed in South Dakota, and he went off to work every day at the missile battalion protecting Ellsworth Air Force Base. But Mommy had grown up in Parral, Mexico, in the state of Chihuahua, and didn't understand a word of English. The neighbors gave her baby clothes and thick winter coats for the brutal South Dakota winters, but they didn't speak Spanish. Papa was often away overnight, and she was alone with 2 small children. I remember Mommy singing a song about Marranito, a little pig, while counting our fingers and toes. Mario and I loved having her undivided attention, and she loved playing